once again here at Cyberhuman Frontiers. Tonight's topic, Nanotech, the brain, the future. Let's get our disclaimer and our public relations announcements out of the way really quickly here. This video does not claim to give medical, legal, political, or financial advice. We offer it solely for your entertainment. But for you, maybe for your entertainment and more, to pique your inquisitiveness. The points of view and purpose of this video is not to incite fear, violence, harassment, or bullying in any way whatsoever, but to share opinions and thoughts with other like-minded individuals curious about the subject to encourage conversation and awareness. The opinions on this stream belong solely to the persons expressing them and are not a representation of the channel Cyberhuman Frontiers. This video and our channel in general may contain certain copyrighted works not specifically authorized to be used by the copyright holder, but which we believe in good faith are protected by federal law and the fair use doctrine for one or more reasons noted in the Copyright Act of 1976. It should be noted that we always make every effort to give credit to the other content creators and lecturers for their fine presentations and articles, and we list them, we make it a practice to list them at the conclusion of the show, if not before. You'll always find that there. You can also find us on Rumble. You can do a query for the channel Cyberhuman Frontiers, find us there. And I would encourage you to go check out https://humaninternet.org, where we have an expanding repository of all sorts of information related to cutting-edge technology and our cyberhuman future. I'm going to take you just on a little bit of a perspective ride here, just for a minute, before we get into our main topic. It is this. We live in this world, experiencing it by way of five senses. And I don't need to name them, you know what they are, taste, touch, sound, smell. Those five senses are very, very limited. We can come up with examples from other species, other animals. For example, dogs and some other animals have a much greater sense of smell, yet it's only still a sense of smell. There is a larger spectrum of smells and odors that no organic living terrestrial creature has ever experienced because they don't have the onboard equipment to be able to interpret it. Next example would be bugs. Bugs can see in a different aspect of the visual range. They can see up into the ultraviolet. So there's a spectrum that is a little bit wider than what we can see that they can see. Now, if we look at what we can hear, that audio spectrum that we can actually hear, and get that information into our brain and interpret it and say, oh, I just heard words or music or whatever it is in a range of from about 100 cycles per second of frequency, and maybe a little lower, maybe 50, 30, up to, at maximum, 15 or 20,000 cycles per second. The range of acoustical vibrations goes far, far and away beyond that. And that's in this terrestrial realm. What our eyes can see is a tiny, tiny, very small slice of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So far what we've talked about is there are other creatures that are endowed with a little bit better senses, yet there's still that five sense world. The picture that I'm trying to paint is that expanse of input, output, or communication, that world of communication is vastly larger, even on Earth, than what we can sense. Now, if you go to take a look at some of the characteristics of genetic molecules, specifically DNA, it has many characteristics, and we know this from physics, of being a transmitting and receiving molecule. We have every reason to believe that it's true, that it can receive and transmit not only at a vastly different frequency range than those five senses that we have, but perhaps out into the quantum world as well. So things that give credence to this are people who have paranormal experiences, people who have some way of seeing, some way of sensing, feeling, whether it be a future thing or a different location, whatever it might be. So I just want to leave that in your mind, that what we're made out of has huge, huge capacities. One thing, if not many others, is just the idea of being able to use the very compact encoding method of DNA to store data like we do in computers, but to be able to store it at much, much higher density and be able to access it much more efficiently. And in the space of a number of strands of DNA that you have in each one of your cells, it would probably be possible to store a gigantic amount of terabytes, exabytes of information that would dwarf what we can do in any kind of a hardware computer piece of storage equipment. So that's my little thought, just to take you on a little bit of a science fiction ride. Now, we're once again focusing on nanoparticles, nanotech, and believe it or not, our nano-sized future. Interestingly, size does not equate to power in this case. You know, we've heard the phrase, the colloquialism, well, bigger is better, size matters, all those kinds of size does matter. But believe it or not, at the very, very, very tiny scale of nanoparticles, the power of those things, because of their ability to have so many of them in such a small space and the ability for whatever energy that they need, it's going to utilize very minute amounts of energy to do whatever it is that they were designed to do. So it's really, really powerful, and there's a huge future in it. The ability to build purpose-designed particles and materials affords new power, way bigger powers to control and augment both the outside world around us with devices and equipment that we can make utilizing that technology, and also the inside world, the human body itself, the brain. That's a big, important piece. So in this episode, we're going to give you one more view of some of this particle synthesis. We'd like to get into something that there's been quite a buzz about on the part of other alternative journalists lately, which is about graphene. And what I probably should do is get a little picture of that up right now. Graphene is made of nothing more, than carbon molecules, carbon atoms, And it is a particular hexagonal structure of carbon atoms. Please stand by while I get it up on screen for you here. I don't quite know what it's going to look like, but we'll get it zoomed in nicely for you in just a second. Okay, that's not too bad. All right, so each one of those little dot things that you see there is a carbon atom. And carbon is really interesting because it can group together in a number of different manner. The same atom can be constructed in a lattice that makes a diamond very, very hard, often, if they're pure, very, very clear. That same carbon atom can be in the form of soot, black stuff. I mean, really black. It stains everything. Not particularly toxic, but it stains everything. It can be in the form of coal, but you compress that coal for about 1 million years and you get a diamond. Isn't that amazing? Well, that's the same atom in a couple of different configurations. Here we have another configuration of it, which is these hexagonal structures, all right? And this is called graphene. And they get into the detail about how the bonding works, single bonds and double bonds, and then the outside edge of that graphene and how it will have an affinity to link together with an adjacent sheet of graphene. Now this, to characterize this a little bit more, even a single layer or structure, however you want to refer to it, has huge tensile strength for the amount of mass that it takes to make it. So being a single layer of molecules and being very, very thin, being, at atomic size thinness, the strength that it has is huge. In the background, I want to just say hi to TMC. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm looking up some stuff in real time based on what you're talking about, and I'm finding graphene doped with iron oxide nanoparticles, iron nanoparticles, things about graphene being magnetic, and things about graphene being able to stimulate or control the way that cells express and or store iron, which has to do with the iron ferrites that perhaps may be existent that
or could be
make somebody
constructed
magnetic.
Yep.
Anyway, that's so proceed, brother. I'm digging away in the background.
It should be noted. That sheet that I had up there, of course, now it's not going to be quite centered, but that's all right. These sheets, these things can be small enough that under the proper conditions, if you could take a sheet of this stuff, not very big, and if you could get it to roll up, and I'm sure that there's a way to get it to roll up, you can make a tube out of this stuff also. So another thing that you could do is if you could get it to roll itself up, or you take fragments of this, they are so small that in the space of, let's say, a hypodermic needle, it would be possible without injuring these structures at all. Big chunks of this stuff could be easily brought into the aqueous solution of the bloodstream of an organism, let's say a mouse, all right, and get it in there, and you got this stuff traveling around. And if you've managed to get this stuff with tagged with particular other atoms on it to enhance its magnetic capability, or to be able to electrically steer it or electromagnetically steer it, you can then drive this to a location in the organism and get it to set itself there. And once again, being so, and once they get there, you could get them to unroll themselves and, let's say, lay themselves as a blanket on something. And I've got some documentation that shows what some of the efforts, the research, and the applications for this are. But anyway, a little quick video here. This is from Undecided with Matt Farrell. And he's going to go through. He's got an 11-minute thing. I don't think we're going to play all of it, but we certainly will post the link to his video so that you can watch the whole thing after the show. I don't know if we're interested in it, we will go further playing it now. We'll see. So a little bit of a primer on nanotech. Okay, here we go.
Technology refers to our ability to study and engineer technologies at a nanoscale, which is a range from 1 to 100 nanometers. And that begs the question, how small is a nanometer?
Okay, really small. He's going to show you pictures. So this is when you consider how big molecular structures and like tissues and organs in a body are, they are relatively huge. So when you get something the size of this, you got something that under the right conditions, it could manage to work its way right through a cell membrane and into a cell, and perhaps not even disrupt the processes in the cell. Really small. So check out the scales that he shows. And we've done this before. We've probably done 16 different flavors of showing you what the size of nanotech is. This is one more flavor.
Well, if I tell you that a nanometer is 1/1000th of a meter, or 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter, I don't think that really clears things up. And I don't know about you, but my brain kind of breaks trying to think about this kind of scale.
Yeah, we're not here to break anybody's brain, okay? And Matt Farrell doesn't want us to break our brains. It's an amazing world. Yeah, boy, it'd be great if every one of us had a microscope and we could just take some ordinary humdrum everyday material and just throw it under there and look at the microscopic world. That's huge compared, and it would be amazing. I did this as a kid. It would be amazing to see what the microstructure of things is, but the size of this stuff is way, way smaller than you could ever be able to see with that microscope. It's absolutely amazing.
Let's try to put this in a different perspective. A human hair is around 75,000 nanometers wide. And remember, the range for nanoscale is 1 to 100 nanometers. Still not doing it for you? Well, let's flip it around. Imagine a marble measures 1 nanometer. In comparison to that, the Earth would measure about 1 meter in diameter. Just let that sink in for a minute. A marble compared to the size of our entire planet. That's 1 nanometer compared to 1 meter.
Okay, got it? Marble, Earth. Marble, Earth. Okay.
Given how mind-boggling these scales are, we definitely have to give credit to the father of nanotechnology, physicist Richard Feynman. It all started with the American Physical Society meeting that was held at the California Institute of Technology on December 29th, 1959.
So when you got stuff this small, you might think that it means, well, gee, it's so small. It's insignificant in every way. And it's such a tiny particle. It's like it's smaller than dust, right? How could it do anything? But that's where this whole world opens up. It is absolutely fascinating because when these particles are designed for a particular purpose, they function. They have functionality. And so that's why small is huge in importance. So he's going to talk about Mr. Feynman now.
Feynman gave a talk that was titled, "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom," where he speculated about being able to construct machines down to the molecular level, and the concept behind nanotechnology was born. It wasn't until 1974 that the term nanotechnology was coined by Professor Norio Taniguchi while he worked on ultra-precision machining. As he put it, nanotechnology mainly consists of the processing of separation, consolidation, and deformation of materials by one atom or one molecule. So we had the concept, then we had the term, but it wasn't until 1981 that this theory became a reality when the development of the scanning tunneling microscope that helped scientists actually see atoms individually. Gerd Binnick and Heinrich Rohr developed the microscope at IBM Zurich Research Laboratories in Switzerland and were later awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1986. That major achievement was followed up by the atomic force microscope in 1985, which had the distinct advantage of imaging on almost all surfaces, including biological samples, glass, composites, and ceramics.
So keep in mind the dates, and keep in mind that the concept was born in 1959. Fast forward to the 80s, and now all sorts of imaging equipment exploiting the reality of this small scale size. And now fast forward another good 40 years, and now we're at the point of the development of all sorts of things in materials science to be able to make things for a purpose.
That would prove to be a major turning point. With the advent of nanotechnology, scientists were now able to manipulate individual atoms, and that takes us into the realm of quantum mechanics, which is the science behind how matter behaves in the atomic and subatomic scale. Thankfully, that's out of scope for this video because it breaks my brain even more.
And we're not here to break. This is for entertainment purposes only. So if you keep in the back of your mind that the ability to get into biological structures and to modify, augment, change, or what, and fill in anything into the blank that you want, and that they do have very small structures in them. And now we are, and by we, I mean the advanced and amazing scientists that work on this stuff at places like MIT and elsewhere, are working to build these structures that can do and will be able to do amazing things. We're way, way, way forward on this whole picture, the story that that Matt Farrell is painting for us. We're way forward on it now. And so let's let him go on. I'm finding this interesting. Hopefully you are too.
But basically, it's how materials at this scale tend to behave differently and exhibit distinctive chemical and physical properties. Scientists were keen to learn and exploit this attribute to craft materials at a nanoscale. And since 1981, we've come forward leaps and bounds in the field of nanotech. There's so much that I could cover, but in the interest of time, I picked 2 categories for examples that are helping to make what seemed like science fiction into science fact for our future. But I'd love to hear in the comments if there are any topics or examples that you'd like to see covered in a future video. Now, the first category is one that I talk about a lot: solar. Nanotechnology is leading the charge for solar energy. Most silicon-based...
I'm going to skip forward through this. You can watch this one yourself, the solar part, because that's not particularly what we're focusing on. I'm going to move a little ahead, once again, in the interest of time. I'm going to try to pick a good spot to move here. Okay, that looks about right. Maybe not.
which is a toxic metal. Researchers have been busy trying to find alternative materials, and there are some efficiency record of 16.6% for quantum dot solar cells made from halide perovskite. University of Sheffield were able to develop a spray-on solar using perovskite solar absorption and can operate efficiently during cloudy days as well. The scientific director at Celtic painting the walls of a building, not just the roof, or as I mentioned earlier, your car. Da Vinci YouTube channel, where we talk about the latest news in EVs and renewable energy. Be sure to check out the link in the description and let us know what you think. Now, the second category I wanted to look at for this video is nanotechnology being applied to energy storage. In a previous video, I walked through graphene and carbon nanotubes and how they're impacting energy storage today. So
you might want to pay attention to just the background information about graphene and carbon nanotubes here, keeping in mind that our emphasis is more toward the biological here.
Specifically, in my supercapacitor video, I talked about how companies like Nanotechnologies and Skeleton are building out graphene-based supercapacitors today. Skeleton's products can be found helping to power major tram systems in big European hubs like Warsaw and Mannheim. As a quick refresher, batteries and supercapacitors share some similarities in how they work. In a battery, there's a positive and negative side, which are called the cathode and the anode. These two sides are submerged in a liquid electrolyte and are separated by a micro-perforated separator, which only allows ions to pass through. When the battery charges and discharges, those ions flow back and forth from the cathode and the anode. But capacitors are different. They don't rely on chemical play in order to function. Instead, they store potential energy electrostatically. Capacitors use a dielectric or an insulator between their plates to separate the collection of positive and negative charges building on each side of the plate. It's this separation that allows the device to store energy and quickly release it. It's basically capturing static electricity. In one recent advancement in batteries from July of 2020, scientists from Clemson Nanomaterials Institute were able to achieve a high rate capability, fast diffusion, high capacity, and a long cycle life thanks to sandwiching silicon nanoparticles with carbon nanotubes called Bucky papers. The cycle life for lithium batteries with silicon-based anodes is usually less than 100. But thanks to the new sandwich silicon electrode structure, they were able to achieve 500 cycles and deliver 3 times more capacity than graphite. Silicon happens to have 10 times higher capacity than graphite, but it expands by about 300% in volume as it absorbs ions. The end result is an anode that breaks apart. This nanostructure counters that factor and would help us replace graphite with silicon, making much more efficient batteries.
Really very interesting as you listen to this man speak. The factors that are involved, for example, some of the characteristics of silicon that depending on what you do to it, it's going to break apart. All of these things have to be considered when building something at any size, but particularly in this world that we're talking about at the nano size, in order that they maintain their structural integrity and that they do what the designer needs them to do. So I think we've got about as much out of that one as I want to grab. Now I'm going to go right to this. Okay, this is for example, what would one of the things that you could do be with nanoparticles? Well, rapid diffusion of large polymeric nanoparticles in the mammalian brain, which could be a mouse, for example. Now, let me go down to the paragraph that I wanted to grab here. Understanding the microstructure and mesh spacing of the brain microenvironment. So keep in mind all this nano stuff and cellular structures and intracellular organelles as well. It has important implications for the development of therapeutic and diagnostic nanoparticles because movement through this space is critical for the effective distribution and or targeting. So studies have estimated the brain ECS mesh size. So they're looking at, what kind of space it is that they have to be able to work within. And again, for you, and me, keeping in mind what some of the existing materials science offers us, i.e. graphene-based nano manufactured lace, if you will, or tubes or tubules, the size of this stuff, and knowing what the base size of the whole environment is very important. So, and they went on to take measurements of the brain ECS pore size, and it was challenging. Artifacts introduced with tissue preservation and processing, as well as the structural heterogeneity of the tissue, including anisotropic, electrostatically charged regions, and dead space microdomains. Now, I'm interested in that one because dead space microdomains might mean that they're little vacant spots, vacant areas that could be occupied by some of these designed particles. But they have a different view of it, which makes some of their measurements unreliable. This space in the living brain is not a static medium. There is continual cerebrospinal fluid flow, as well as a relative volume fraction and tortuosity changes resulting from cell volume changes in response to varying levels of metabolic activity. And of course, if you're using anesthetic drugs or anything else that they're using. So it's a dynamic environment. It's not a static environment. And I'm just going to mute something over here in the background. So these are some of the things that they're up against when they try to build this stuff. Other factors that they had to deal with. It was believed that a negative or neutral surface charge would enable less interaction and improve diffusion in the brain. But and then going on, in a study, polyethylene glycol coated quantum dots, approximately 35 nanometers in size, with net negative surface charge were used. And so they did a study to see what the porosity of what they were trying to get into was. Anyway, there we go. This is a little bit of what's going on in that field. And remembering that this stuff, you can build sort of macroscopic structures out of very small pieces of this material. Now I'm going to go on to another one. And it is right here. Okay. Just imagine, if you will. So we're talking about graphene oxide, and we're oxide gold-coated nanosheets. So we're talking about graphene nanosheets, and that they are impregnated with gold at some level. Probably not a high density of gold, but what can you do with that? Well,
you can create a chiral nanoassembly that enables a strategy for simultaneously profiling surface glycoproteins and microRNA in living cells, which is a document that I just found. Go ahead. Wow. Proceed.
Well, among other possibilities, so we start with our carbon, all right, and we make graphene, and we know what graphene is: very strong, very flexible, and if we now enhance it with either an electrically conductive property, in other words, impregnating with oxide gold, or impregnating with iron oxide to pick up more of a magnetic characteristic, what can you do with this stuff? Well, I would guess that if one were able to impregnate this with something magnetic, you could actually, by way of electromagnetic input from the outside, you could get this sheet to change shape. You could actually navigate, steer, fold it, unfold it, roll it up, and unroll it by way of using electromagnetics if you've got that added characteristic of electromagnetic sensitivity in it. Now, in this application, they are experimenting with nanosheets containing chitosan scaffold, improving ventricular contractility and function, and implanting it into an infarcted heart. And an infarcted heart is nothing more than a heart that's had a heart attack. So, abnormal conduction and improper electrical impulse propagation are common in a heart after a heart attack, myocardial infarction. The scar tissue has become non-conductive, and therefore the electrical communication between the adjacent cardiomyocytes is disrupted. In the current study, they synthesized and characterized a conductive scaffold by incorporating graphene oxide gold nanosheets, because it's basically carbon and gold linked together, into a natural polymer. Inclusion of the nanosheets in a carbon scaffold, a CS. I got to look up what they meant by CS scaffold. I don't know what that means, so I'll just say CS, and I'll let us all read this more carefully at another time. The scaffold exhibited excellent porous architecture with a desired swelling and controlled degradation properties. It supported cell attachment, so that's important. All right, we've manufactured this scaffold out of basically a carbon material, and it supported cell attachment and growth with no signs of rejection, and that's what they mean by cytotoxicity here. In a rat model of myocardial infarction, got to be careful how you say that, in vivo, as well as an isolated heart, the scaffold, after 5 weeks of implantation, showed a significant improvement in the QRS interval. And the QRS interval refers to part of an electrocardiogram waveform. The QRS is when the main ventricle fires. It's when the big part of the heart really does its beating. And they showed an improvement in the QRS interval, which would be translated into there being improved conductivity within the heart. All right. Associated with enhanced conduction velocity and contractility in the infarction zone. So that was in the scar tissue zone. And they did all this using graphene oxide gold impregnated nanosheets. So I find that to be rather fascinating, because if you can do that, and if the net result is that you've taken some otherwise dead or otherwise now inactive scar tissue, and you've been able to reestablish the conductivity, not necessarily the contractility because the muscle tissue around it is dead, but get conductivity through it, then what could you do with other neurological structures, i.e. a brain, if there were some sort of a conductive blockage, or if you wanted to augment the conductivity or bridge connections or conductivity from one neural ganglion, which is a cluster of neurons, to another one? What if you wanted to establish some sort of a new kind of wiring, if you will? And we've talked about this in previous episodes, and we've talked about conductive nanotubes. Well, this is another flavor of it, another way to do it. And it's using something very small, very inexpensive material to manufacture, by the way. Graphene is not particularly costly. I suppose it's going to cost more if you put gold into it. But iron oxide impregnated sheets of this sort, probably not real expensive to make. So that's what I got so far. I have more videos on Nanotech, but I think what I want to do is drop the share. And so that was the title of that. And we'll have all these links there for you. This comes from nature.com, and it is in their scientific reports category, their section of that website. And you'll be able to see that at your leisure when you want to. So, anyway, TMC, what are you thinking? You got something that you'd like to take us through?
Yeah, I can show you a bunch of documents that I found that I've been kind of scanning through.
Let's look.
Yeah, and none of this is, we're not going to dig too far into any of it, really.
We don't need to, because we don't want to bury ourselves and everybody else in the, the techno-ease, if you will.
Right. So we'll start. Hang on. Let me find the other page. There were two of them that I had. Up.
While he's finding that, what the effort here is to try to bring us all into an understanding of this submicroscopic world. And there wouldn't be engineering being done in this if there wasn't a goal in mind. And technology is not our enemy. The use of it and the application of it can be our enemy. The proper application, the ethical application of it, and all that stuff, that's really important. But the technology is just amazing. We want you to see what some of the potentials are, what some of the cutting edge research is, and what this portends for potential futures for us. And we're going to want to have our voice and our influence regarding the applications of all of this stuff as it goes forward, because it's coming. Anyway, I see you found your thing
Yeah.
there.
So here's the first one, and we'll just highlight real fast some things that were interesting. Functionalized graphene oxide serves as a novel vaccine nanoadjuvant. So it's an adjuvant to stimulate an immunoresponse for robust stimulation of cellular immunity. And it talks about using propylene glycol and other PEG similar type stuff to wrap around these materials to deliver them, and then they ultimately induce some type of an immune response.
And it should be noted when we offhand mention a word such as that one up on the top of the screen there, we're not in any way trying to make any suggestions regarding anything medical, legal, political. We certainly would not want to step on the toes of any well-recognized medical authorities in fields such as that.
Literally, it's from PubMed.
This is coming right from. Yeah, thank you.
This is a publicly available free PubMed document that talks about standardized methods for delivering current mandatory inoculations.
Yep.
So it's not controversial at all. I mean, this is how what's currently done in the industry.
Well, we know how it's been in the past, and we just want to make that very clear to everybody. This is information that's in the public domain for you, and we'll put the link out there for you as well. Go on.
Yeah. So graphene oxide. This is an alternative media website, but it had some interesting stuff in here, and they talk about some different things. And here's some pictures that I wanted to show you, and those of you that.
Interesting.
Yeah. So one of these is a picture of the Pfizer vaccine, right? And the other one is a picture of graphene oxide. And they're taken at different resolutions with a relatively the same type of microscope. And what they're illustrating here are the similarities in what they've analyzed so far. Whether it's true or not, you gotta do your own research. But a lot of the information in the United States is limited. There's a lot of additional information. If you know other languages, you can go to, this one comes from, I think, Mexico or Spain. I don't know.
It was Spain. It was Spain. I looked at it previously.
Yeah, Spanish national political. Anyway, so just to move on, this stuff is. It's what it looks like. It's liquid metal, more or less. It's graphite, but it's liquid conductivity materials. And so here's the next one: magnetic interactions in graphene decorated with iron oxide nanoparticles.
So there you go. Look at the potential usability of that. Because once you've got that iron, once you've got that ferrous magnetic particle in there, now you've opened up the whole interconnect between electromagnetics or static magnetics and the configuration of this graphene sheet. Now, is this going to be a sheet or is it going to be a tube? What is it going to be that they made this into?
Not quite sure. This stuff is talking about making it. So they're explaining that they're doing this with ethanol. So I'm not sure. I haven't dug into the document, and I may not even have access to the document. Some of the stuff that really gives away the proverbial keys, they're behind paywalls.
This one's really good. And by the way, in that abstract, that paragraph that you have right there.
Yeah, it's pay to play on this one. Go ahead.
If you were an organic chemist, or if you were a student of organic chemistry, which once upon a time I was, we did laboratory syntheses of things. And this is the process by which you would do a multi-step synthesis of that iron oxide decorated graphene.
Changes in the synthesis solvent, which is the stuff the bath that they put it in to grow this stuff.
That's right.
Make it go together. Played a major role in the magnetic properties of the graphene Fe2O3 nanocomposite, which is
the iron oxide. That's the iron oxide. Yep.
And it says what they did is they were able to mess around with how they constructed this stuff and what they used to construct it with, and they ended up being able to determine different end results, saturation of magnetization.
So they were able to optimize it. By
Yeah.
tweaking their synthesis process, they were able to sort of perfect it.
This is one example, and what there's. I don't want it to end at, oh, we made it this way, and then we found the way to make it the best. It doesn't stop there. If you, through the process of figuring out how to construct this stuff, know that this particular bath or this particular recipe yields a response from this type of material, either with a magnetic field or an electric field, you would be able to selectively apply the right materials that you've made based on the bath that you put it in, the right recipe, and so that you have tunability.
Right. Tunability. Now, also, if in your solution, if in this case it's an alcohol solution, if you had other active ions of something else, for example, gold or anything else that you wanted to try to decorate, quote unquote, decorate this sheet or structure with, it might be calcium, it might be gold, it might be iron, then you'd be able to, quote unquote, decorate this with whatever other type of atom that you wanted. And that would be for a purpose of having a desired resulting sheet that would have the biological characteristics that you want, whatever it might be. So you're making a blanket.
I don't want to say any and all too much, but
no.
Loosely speaking, yes. Once you start adding things like open ionic charges that are, looking for a specific buddy when they go into the body, or you have specific DNA or RNA hangers that are off the sides, and these are like fishing nets or fishing lines, and they look and seek for different things. So to your point, yes,
and
everything
affinity,
and all, not so much, but looking for specific components that have been known and repeatable in, for example, in a laboratory environment. Therapeutically speaking, this would be useful for something like stage 4 lymphoma, where you dose somebody 2 or 3 times with level 1, base 1 substrate, and you let it infuse into the body. And because it's systemic and it's lymphoma, you let it go through the lymph nodes, you let it go through all the organs, you let it go through everything so it's completely saturated. And then when you have your step 1 base, your base level layer in there, you add therapy number 2, so that the base 1 layer will then open up where it needs to open up to allow the right medications to come in for phase 2 of your cancer therapy. So instead of completely liquefying your organs with something like napalm introduced via an IV that pulses through your entire body, you get very, very safe, very, very specific medications that are delivered, and then site-selective medications delivered on top of that secondarily or tertiarily to selectively target exactly where disease is, leaving the rest of the body alone. And then when the therapy's done, perhaps a year later, you administer additional medication to start removing all of those layers of medication and all those layers of genetics potentially that are sitting there waiting for the right lock and key mechanisms to deliver targeted therapies and replace proverbial napalm known as chemotherapy. And I haven't said anything about fill in the blank.
Right.
Whatever.
Well, the deal is,
I care less about you.
I mean, if you want to talk about it, one of the platforms.
Here's why. Platform that has an app that's in every single phone, and an app like that is going to provide an interface for Google to do things like interact with graphene and iron oxide nanoparticles in your skin, in your brain, in your heart, because it's going to electromodulate. Because something like a phone is able to emit an electromagnetic field, an electric field, or just a magnetic field. It can also emit ultrasound. It can also pulse light. And later on, I'm going to show you how graphene responds to infrared light. Oh, by the way, do we know that Face ID and biometric authentication to get into a device and something to measure your heart rate, they use lasers for that, folks. And those lasers are tunable, and they can move into the ranges very easily, into the ranges that interact with, stimulate, and read as biosensors the graphene iron oxide stuff that's potentially being deployed in mass. Magnetic graphene forms a new kind of magnetism. Check this out. Researchers have identified a new form of magnetism, so-called magnetic graphene, which could point the way towards understanding superconductivity. Did you know that graphene is a superconductor and it's room temperature? at room temperature, right? So that means that graphene, if it's put into a biological organism, potentially functions like a superconductor. And when you look at quantum space transmitters, free space quantum transmitters, known as complex phased array electromagnetic systems, you can potentially put two and two together and start looking at how quantum connections, since we've defined earlier in this show that quantum simply means interactions at the atomic and the molecular scale, you have a quantum network that's potentially being constructed here in mass at the cellular level to biosense and ultimately stimulate life mechanically through the internet.
Yep.
So anyway, let's go to the next thing that I found during your opening monologue, which was beautiful, by the way. Graphene iron oxide nanocomposites, an efficient catalyst for ammonium perchlorate decomposition and burn rate enhancer. Now here's some interesting stuff, and I don't know if I'm going to remember exactly what I read here. But
hang on a second. Interesting point Truth Hunter brought up, and good to see you out there, Truth Hunter. We have not yet touched upon harmonics or electromagnetic fields, but in previous installments we have talked about that, and we will, if we can, we'll incorporate that into this discussion too. Yep. Go on. So, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So this talks about hybridizing iron oxide and graphene and using it for fuel, like changing the burn rates for fuel, talking about ballistic properties, the viscosity of it. And the reason I bring this up is that graphene is going to be in everything. Graphene is a room temperature stable superconductor that opens the door for all kinds of interesting things. And anyway, it's rockets. Anyway, just let's move on. I'm going to stop share real quick and reshare the other screen that I had. It is this one, chirality. So graphene chirality. Let's start at the beginning. So while Indy was talking earlier on, right, I typed in something like graphene chiral DNA, right? And I come up with a whole bunch of interesting stuff that, DNA origami, we've been over this quite a bit. And it talks about using DNA to make complex three-dimensional structures that you can assemble and disassemble and self-assemble all day long in the body or in a lab. It doesn't matter. So that's what that one is. Regulation of DNA self-assembly and DNA hybridization by chiral molecules with corresponding biosensor applications, right? Chirality, which simply means specifically left spin or specifically right spin. And when you look at how light polarizes, you have left-hand circular polarization, you have a right-hand circular polarization.
Yep.
Well, DNA does the same thing. And that's how you get a spin state. If you want to talk quantum, that's how you get a spin state. And you can energize DNA. And because it has a known structure and a known composition, you can induce a spin state that is repeatable so that you can energize DNA and get a known perturbation off the ass end.
And make it happen
DNA.
Over and over again.
Right.
You're
and it
creating
has a known
a machine.
Known repeatable emission over and over and over again. The same is true for graphene.
You're automating a machine, basically.
More or less.
Yep.
That's where this is all going, is automating biomechanical functions. That's where this is going, is the automation of biomechanical functions.
Oh, if we have time at the end, we could get into a big picture discussion about that, but go on.
Well, I'm going to keep, electrical access to critical coupling of circularly polarized waves in graphene chiral metamaterials. So why is this useful? This isn't necessarily biology, but what this does is like, it's just a brief window, a small window into what's possible with this building material, with this construction material. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a be-all, end-all. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to respond the same way inside a biological versus outside of biological. But what you see here is something like what I was talking about earlier, controlling the circular polarization state. It's important in modern photonics. Because it plays a pivotal role in the field of quantum computation and information, optical communication of spin information, and circular dichromism, spectroscopy, natural chiral materials composed of elements without any mirror symmetry have been widely used to manipulate the circular polarization states of light since the discovery of optical activity in quartz crystal. And it goes on and on and on. It talks about, in the terahertz, and there's other documents that talk about near infrared region and how this stuff energizes basically with the right resonant characteristics that happen to be something that your cell phone can emit. Just so happened. What a coincidence, huh? Anyway, let's move on. Highly effective electrochemical chiral sensor of tryptophan. Gobble, gobble. In tantamers based on covalently functionalized reduced graphene oxide with L-lysine. And so what this really is one example of how graphene is an electrochemical chiral sensor. Now, why is that important? Well, if you were to administer graphene, right, and other components into the body, and you were to land those components where they needed to be in organ systems or inside cells or whatever. Exactly. As the cell goes through its normal respiration and reproduction, you will be able to start measuring how much of something is either being added or removed from the environment, hence an electrochemical biosensor. Electrochemical biosensor means it understands a chemical response and it emits electricity. Or to stimulate, for example, you would be able to apply an electrical stimuli and achieve a chemical response. And when we look at this stuff in something like the brain or the heart or the nervous system, what you're getting at is an on-off switch for synapses. Yep. One method of many as an on-off switch for synapses.
But it's particularly elegant in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Next, the chiral detection using reusable fluorescent amylose functionalized graphene. What the hell does that mean? What it tells me, by the way, graduate school of the Chinese Academy of Beijing, right? By using DNA or a peptide as a common probe, graphene-based biosensing has made significant progress. However, to the best of our knowledge, a graphene-based chiral sensor has not been reported. But until now, that opening sentence is like the opening one-liner for every medical paper that's going to do something about graphene in some period of time where it's considered novel. This is back in 2011. So anybody or most who are going to write about graphene back then are going to say, this has never been done before. Look at my paper. I need peer review, so I'm important. So I get cred in the MIA Academy, military, industrial, academic. Right? Chiral selective recognition, right, is perhaps the most subtle to achieve because of the similarity of the optical and tantamers. Doesn't matter. What they're getting at is being able to shoot light onto something and know that based on the response they're getting from the light that they're projecting or shooting onto something, they'll know what DNA or what molecule or what thing is what based on how it's labeled.
Know exactly what state it's in.
So you can DNA barcode, and then based on the barcode of the DNA, it will have a different chiral effect. It will have a different resonance, a different emission, a different perturbation, if you will.
Right. That's right.
So anyway, they talk about being able to use graphene to understand tryptophan as a biosensor. Graphene as a biosensor, and chirality is important. Observing chiral edge states in gapped nanomechanical graphene. Now, why do we want to look at something like this? Because...
And if you can grasp the big picture of what we're talking about, I mean, they just picked tryptophan, all right, because it was convenient. But you can extrapolate from this, being able to use this capability to monitor the state of something to a whole lot of other different types of molecules. And, this is an evolving science, if you will. So they start easy and then they get more complex.
All right. So I want to say it again so bad, Indy, but I won't. Just out of
you really, you really can't on this platform. We have many viewers, and there is a community, and certain just general.
Well, if you're in this community, I highly encourage you to go to Rumble, and you should look up Telegram, t.me human internet, and you will find a freer, more open platform to communicate more freely on. Having said that,
yes,
I will
you
attempt to put skid chains on my tongue and bend over
that's fine.
for YouTube.
That's really fine. And that's what those platforms are there for. And they can be found. It's searchable. You'll be able to find us come right up if you look for channels on rumble.com.
T.me, Cyberhuman Frontiers, T.me, Human Internet. Go ahead, Andy.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And we've got those links working here below in the show notes.
And you tell me how often you're going to ask.
It's true. Actually, that's true.
Yeah. Guess where I used to work?
And
I won't tell you, but
big tech company.
I used to work at Big Telecom.
And by the way, it's true that something seems to have happened and this we're going off topic. Something seems to have happened in our society where people seem to somehow become overly insulted or broken by mere words. Well, those words are they are the expression of what you truly believe and what you want to say. And if it's important for you to say it, well, you should be able to say it. And if someone else doesn't want to listen, they can just not listen.
I have another analogy for you. If words are that painful, imagine when words are truly no longer available, and then imagine pain. What happens when words no longer suffice and kinetic conflict ensues because words are no longer an effective means of establishing the best ideas and then having those ideas propagate forward to be tested and tried against others that say they have the best ideas, only to then, through voting and through consent of the governed, establish whatever is going to be established with those ideas. That is being stripped away with
you've hit on
like
something
YouTube.
Really, 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 really important there. And once again, it's on topic, actually, if you think of it, that we're a whole lot better off being able to freely use words than to not have that ability and have to seek some other means. We're way better off expressing ourselves that way. It's a wonderful way to convey ideas back and forth and to test them against ourselves or against authority figures, or recognized experts in quote unquote any field, and test those ideas and challenge those ideas, because those ideas, whatever comes from those recognized or renowned authorities, if they're real and if they're true, they'll stand up to the challenge, and if they don't, then they weren't true, and that should be illuminated.
If you're going to piss yourself over words. If you're going to piss yourself over words, what are you going to do when the strike teams come, courtesy of Joe Biden? What are you going to do?
Just don't step in number two, all right? I don't know.
Well, if you piss yourself over words, you're probably going to number two yourself when the strike team shows up.
Yeah.
So make sure you're wearing underwear. Otherwise, you might step in number two.
We really kind of do need to make a stand at this point in the forum of ideas and the expression through words and the freedom of expression through words. We really all need to make a stand at this level, because to go to the next level is going to be, it's basically going to be somewhat harmful, shall we say. It's going to be,
so
it could get tough.
To go back on topic here, graphene and chirality, right? Get down to the quantum scale, quantum phenomena, right? Using things like quantum spin or Valley Hall effects. And you can look up on your phone. Your phone has a Hall sensor. Your phone has a magnetic sensor. Your phone has a variety of ways of sensing magnetic fields, potentially up to and including measuring photon spin of light inside of a nitrogen vacancy cavity that might be embedded in the photoreceptor, i.e. the camera. Who knows? What
you got me thinking? I wonder if those sensors or sensors yet to come, maybe on the drawing board now, can detect spin.
They can, and there's patents for it. Lockheed Martin has them. They've been using this technology for an incredibly long time.
That's huge.
Yeah, dude. V-cell arrays, and they have other types of vacancy cavities where it's not necessarily exclusive to nitrogen. So they can take and make diamonds, right? And what they can do is they can put a little pocket inside of a nano-sized diamond, and then they can inside that pocket put a gas in there. And the example that I'm familiar with, that I just found another example a little while ago, and I haven't gone back to review it yet. But in what I'm familiar with, they insert nitrogen inside of a bubble inside of a diamond, right? And then they can shoot light through it, and then put a magnetic field, put the nano diamond with the little cavity full of nitrogen in a magnetic field. And then they can change the magnetic field. And as the light's passing through the diamond and the nitrogen vacancy cavity, as the magnetic field changes, so does the spin of the light. So they can measure a magnetic field with the changing of the polarization or the photon spin of light. Anyway.
Amazing.
Yeah, so there's a lot happening right now that is just being rolled out, and nobody's really saying boo about it because everybody's still asking Facebook whether or not they track their users with cookies.
Oh, man. Yep.
Anyway, mid-infrared plasmonic circular dichromism generated by graphene nanodisk assemblies. What is this? This is some bananas right here.
This is wild.
Yeah, so it says here,
and we got to translate this. We have a big audience out there. We've got to try to translate this into terms that I can understand. Let's say
they're talking about the mid-infrared spectrum, which is very, very common, and it's safe, right? It doesn't really hurt you. The spectral interval, thermal bioimaging is what it talks about. It talks about demonstrating that graphene plasmids, right, offer an opportunity as a biosensing, bioimaging device for biomolecules, right? And it what they're talking about here is using the mid-infrared range to achieve some type of vibrational resonance or understanding vibrational lines. So what does that mean? If something's inside your body and it's moving around and it has a resonance, it's going back and forth, forward and back, right? Three-dimensional space, up, down, left, right, forward, back. And if you can shine light in there and look at that, you'll be able to see the edges, and you'll be able to understand where the edges are now versus a femtosecond or a picosecond or a nanosecond later, and just sample, and then understand what the resonant characteristics are, what the movement characteristics are, maybe bioimaging in a variety of ways based on how you can transduce energy. And what I just talked about with nanodiamonds, with nitrogen vacancies, it's only one example of what could potentially be administered into something like a biological, and then have something like infrared light shine through the body while it's in its own magnetic field or in a synthetic magnetic field, and remotely measure the changes in the magnetic characteristics that the nitrogen vacancy piece of nanoparticulate that's doped onto something else that's now attached to or infused inside of a cell will be the sensor, and the light will be able to stimulate and potentially read the response based on what's going on. I use nitrogen vacancy nanodiamonds as a simple example, but there are many materials.
Others.
Graphene, paramagnetic nanoparticles, all that stuff can do the same thing based on whatever it is you're measuring with and whatever it is you're inserting into the body. And that's where we get back to the cell phones. A few episodes ago, and we're like, look at all the different frequency bands that this cell phone puts out. Yeah, all of that, it means that it puts out a variety of signals in the electromagnetic spectrum. Light is only a very small piece of the electromagnetic spectrum.
That's right.
And so the stuff that we see in the public domain gives us insight into what's possible. And then we have to take bits and pieces of material science stuff and start projecting what's possible or probable with papers that maybe don't leave the private locked room of a library in a college like MIT, where you have to sign in and sign out and no phones go in, and perhaps wear gloves and you're under monitoring so that you don't take anything out, because it might be a repository for classified information for things like DARPA and the Department of Energy.
Could be anything.
And it would be on-site local information that's proprietary to institutions like perhaps the Broad Institute, which is a partnership between MIT and Harvard. They would be a great place to have standalone databases that are considered national security, which then provides the opportunity to have high-level surveillance of all people working in and around those establishments and provide reasons for advanced level security and monitoring at home as well as in the office for everybody involved, because intellectual property goes with the brain. When the brain goes home to see family, intellectual property goes that way too. And off we go. Nanodisk assemblies. So who knows, right? Nano-sized, nanodisk could be liquid. The liquid stuff we looked at a little while ago that seemed like it would just look like bubbles. Well, that it could be even smaller than that. Like when you look at the dark components, we just see like a liquid stream or what looks like soap around the edge of a bubble. Well, those could be nanodiscs. They could be nanorods. They could just be little nano dots. They could be anything. They don't have to be, it's not fluid. You know what I mean? It's not specifically exclusively fluid.
Right.
It might look like fluid, but it's not necessarily fluid. So who knows? Who freaking knows? Chiral graphene quantum dots. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Chiral nanostructures from metals and semiconductors attract wide interest as components for polarization-enabled optoelectronic devices. Optoelectronics. Similarly to other fields of nanotechnology, graphene-based materials can greatly enrich physical and chemical phenomena associated with optical and electronic properties of these chiral nanostructures and facilitate their applications in biology. They talk in this paper about, right, attaching cytosine, I don't know how you say that, moieties to the edges of graphene quantum dots, right? And it leads to their morphology change. In this case, their helical buckling due to the chiral interactions at the crowded edges. And so they're able to tweak this stuff and make it any freaking shape they want. So when they hit it with directed energy, it does exactly the right thing. Right? So lab environment, you make a star, you make a circle, you make a square, you make a spiral, right? You make all these different things, and then you just, okay, we're going to put you in a little contained Faraday cage, and there's an antenna on each side, and we can selectively control what frequencies come through each of the antennas, and we can selectively control what the magnetic field characteristics are, what the electric field characteristics are, what the pulse fields are, what the pulse durations are, all of it, and we can understand and map with precision exactly what these individual, uniquely created, in this case, graphene quantum dots, what they do in various electromagnetic fields. What do they do in different sound fields? What do they do in different light fields? What do they do in different bioassays? What I mean by that is, how do they respond in blood? How do they respond in urine? How do they respond in cerebral spinal fluid? Meanwhile, you're still in this box that's got antennas all the way around it, and you put this stuff in a variety of different things that you perhaps have gotten from Planned Parenthood from an aborted baby. But hey, it's for science, right? It's for science. Chirographene plasmonic Archimedes spiral nanostructure with tunable circular dichromism and enhanced sensing performance. So biological sensors, right? Going into the population with patents coming online, something like WO 2020-060606, courtesy of Microsoft, where they use cryptocurrency, right? And they fuse together cryptocurrency with biomechanical, biofunctional activity. How do you do that? Well, you have to measure and understand things like protein and chemical and enzymatic excretions to understand how well your little recipe in biophysical subject biobag number 1 versus biobag number 2 versus biobag number 3. And that's your little commodity farm animal section. And over in the other state or the other country, we have biobag number 2 and biobag number 3. And we can't forget about biobag number 1. And we've done a little something different over there. And so in order to get rewarded with crypto in this hypothetically for your entertainment purpose only example, your little recipe has to work really, really good. What is your recipe supposed to do? Who knows? Somebody knows. Somebody knows. Let's move on. DNA-based specific modulation of microampere transverse edge currents through metallic graphene nanoribbons with a nanopore. what the hell is this? This is where they can assemble graphene around DNA at a particular point on the DNA and attach the hydrogen bonds that typically hold the sidewalls of the DNA together. Those then bond to the graphene. And as that DNA is stimulated, or as that DNA changes, it changes the conductive properties of the graphene, which can potentially be remotely monitored. Now, that's just monitoring. If you wanted to stimulate that DNA, you would site selectively apply this graphene sheet to whatever piece of DNA and whatever place that DNA needs to be placed at, right? You put this graphene sheet there. You would then energize the graphene sheet, which then excites the DNA and potentially emits a polarized photon, a chiral-based polarized photonic emission. And if it does that, right, if you can manually induce an emission of DNA, what is that really doing in the quantum space when you think about cell division happening from one cell when the sperm and the egg are joined together, and then that divides into 2 cells, that divides into 4 cells, that divides into 8 cells. Every time the division happens, you have quantum entanglement with all of the genetic information in the cells. Yep. So when you're full grown or when you're ready to go to school and you get shot up with whatever the hell, right? And it potentially has this kind of stuff in it, who knows what's going to happen when it attaches to specific parts of your DNA and starts vibrating and oscillating and perturbing your DNA that overrides the natural perturbations that the DNA would undergo based on normal environmental stimuli. What do I mean by that? If you run a lot, or if you jump a lot, or if you fall down and scrape your knee, right? If you hit a heavy bag over and over and over again, your body's going to change, and it's going to be coded that way in your bones, your muscles, i.e. your DNA. It's going to adapt to your environment. That's why when you lift weights, you get stronger.
That's absolutely true. Basic.
If you can jack into the DNA and modulate that, why not grow a super soldier while they're repairing themselves after they're done training, and you've got them all wired up while they're resting for their 6 or 8 hour rest period? You go ahead and start modulating their DNA to accelerate healing or to accelerate bone growth after you've given them a very specific meal and vitamin supplementation so that they have all of the micro and macro nutrition they need as the DNA is energized to go ahead and assemble all this stuff so they can get big and bulky and smarter and whatever the hell they're going to do with soldiers. Now that we're mainlining genetic therapies and calling them whatever. So there's some cool pictures in here that, just kind of go over what this stuff can do. These are heat maps.
What are those heat maps showing?
Self-consistent heart rate potential at 0 biased voltage. And so they're talking about a graphene nanoribbon biosensor here that looks like an H pore with cytosine positioned at the center. So it's biomolecular electronics that they're talking about here. And what they're looking at, the different heat maps, means that what they're showing you is an example of how they're able to use this stuff as a biosensor. It changes its conductivity. What does that mean? You've got graphene wrapped around a piece of DNA and you put it in a magnetic field. It's going to have a unique emission. It's going to resonate. It's going to have a certain characteristic. Now, if you do something to induce a change in that DNA, because DNA is attached to that graphene nanoribbon, all of a sudden the picture might go from A to B, or from B to C, or from C to D. And because this is a heat map of, as an example, an electromagnetic signature, if you had a system that was measuring the body, it would know, hey, this thing changed. It went from bright green and yellow down to purple. Well, that means this. Check, log it off. Check, log it off. Check, log it off. And all of it can be, this is remote medicine, folks. I
wonder if you could go so far as to encapsulate a segment or a section of DNA inside of a graphene tube. In case
I don't see why not.
I don't see why not.
Yeah. Let's see what else. We're about halfway through this. Plasmonics of magnetic and topological graphene-based nanostructure. I mean,
you know what? Hang on. Before you get to that one, let me grab the share quickly. I got something that relates. It's sort of related. And let's see here. Yep, I got it. It's right here. Okay. Enabling graphene oxide nanosheets as water separation membranes. Now, that might not sound like much, but when you can use, let's say that you can imagine making graphene oxide nanosheets that have openings in them, holes in them. They've been designed in such a way that they have a pore, if you will. and have that pore be of a specific size so that certain things can get through them and certain won't, or because of chemical properties, certain things just are repelled by that pore and other things would go through. So these guys, along with everything else that we're talking about with graphene oxide, nanosheets, and nanostructures, these guys report a novel procedure to synthesize a new type of water separation membrane using graphene oxide nanosheets so that water can flow through the nano channels between GO layers while unwanted solutes are rejected by both size exclusion, in other words, that implies that they're able to make pores in the nanosheet, and also by charge effects, which is exactly what I was saying, repelled either electrostatically or by repelled chemically perhaps too.
Can I interject here real quick?
Yeah.
I read, just to simplify this quickly, if you're going to continue.
Yeah, I just wanted to stick it in there.
Yeah, I've read documents that discuss graphene as water filtration for desalinization. So if you were to put graphene systems like off the coast of, whatever, Florida, California, and
make fresh water,
East Coast, West Coast, you literally can, you have unlimited supply of water provided you have power. And I'm willing to bet that if you could make the system efficient enough, you just use the inertial energy in the waves to push the water through.
Right through.
Graphene.
Exactly.
And you get clean, very, very cheap, clean water.
Yep. You wouldn't even need to pump it up and drip it through. You could capitalize on the energy of the waves pushing the water. That's true. Yep.
And even if you couldn't, you'd be able to have efficient energy systems that would be able to assist with whatever power functionality was needed.
So this is the kind of thing that they're working with, fine-tuning the charges, all right, the functionality, and the spacing of the GO sheets, the GO nanosheets.
Graphene oxide.
Testing the membranes with different numbers of graphene oxide layers to demonstrate. Yeah, you could also multi-layer them, right? You could actually have like a multi-step filtration.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, you're right. So that would actually be a better way to do it. If you could sample the water, if you could sample any water, right? You could use this in a freaking backpacking environment. If you could sample the water and you knew that what you were dealing with, if you were in a rural environment like up in the woods and you're dealing with a lake versus dealing with something like in a polluted river that, the mines from back in the day would just flush all their waste chemicals into the main river bodies, right? Yep. It's a different environment than the lake, which is also a different environment than the ocean. So if you knew what you were dealing with, you'd be able to, exactly as you stated there, figure out what the tuned functional graphene spacing is to get the most efficient water flow possible with the least amount of energy needed to achieve that goal.
Yep. Anyway, back to you. I just thought that was just one more interesting little future potential application.
Yeah, let's go through this real quick. It just graphene plasmonics, right? Magnetic and topical graphene-based nanostructures. This stuff is insane. And so what they're talking about here is that they can tune fundamental limits of the plasmonics, right? Apart from the ultimate single layer thickness. It talks about being able to tune this stuff with chemical doping or applying an electric field. So if you apply a magnetic field to something that's conductive, you get electric, and vice versa. So don't be stalled up because everybody's talking about magnetic. When you understand that there is a direct correlation between an electric field and a magnetic field in the far field or when transmitting through a conductor, and that there is a correlation, albeit not a direct one, there is an indirect correlation in the near field of an electromagnetic field between an electric field and a magnetic field, then you can see very easily that it would not be very hard to build conversion tables to do something like apply an electric field selectively, so that you can do things like make chemicals to then dope something perhaps inside the body as it's self-assembling. You get self-assemble this stuff put in and then self-assemble that stuff put in. And then over like 30 days, right? You just gently modulate modulate, especially when you're sleeping, right? Because you're not moving around. So it'd be very easy to not have to make the algorithmic changes necessary to track you. Case in point, how do you get a phone call or watch YouTube in a car when you're driving down the road at 60 or 70 miles an hour on the freeway? The cell tower is tracking you. Well, your Wi-Fi does the same thing. Your Bluetooth does the same thing. And what I'm getting at is potentially putting all the right pieces in all the right places. And then while you're sleeping over a 30-day period between 6 and 8 hours a day in your cozy little bed, there's the little cocoon where you're not going to move more than 6 or 8 inches.
Right. That's right. Of course, just as a side point, the combination of cell towers and the onboard electronics in the car are driving the car for you, but that's a little bit in the future.
Yeah, so it talks about a surface plasmon polaritons, right? And so what they're getting at here is that they can dope this stuff and make this stuff responsive to a broad spectral range of electromagnetic frequencies that run from the terahertz frequencies down to the mid-infrared frequencies. And the terahertz frequencies are where we're going with 6G. And terahertz frequencies also means sub-terahertz frequencies. It's just a matter of how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
That's right.
Sub-terahertz, your phone, right? A new Google phone.
And we got to ask everybody that's participating with us, go down those rabbit holes. All right. There is so many instances of when we've seen imagination and science fiction that have literally come true. All right. Go down the rabbit holes. It's not as crazy as you think. Go on.
Yeah. A new Google phone, the antennas that are used for sensing force in the environment, right? How hard am I pressing on my skin? How hard am I pressing on the counter? How much did the tennis ball deform as I was squeezing it to improve my grip? Your phone can measure that with the Google Soli radar chip as one example. That's where I found it in the patent. And what it talks about in this radar force sensing patent is being able to transmit up to 400 gigahertz out of the Google Soli style chip. That is 0.4 terahertz.
0.4 terahertz.
That's right. So when we look at this stuff and we are looking at plasmonics of magnetic and topological graphene-based nanostructures, and then in the abstract, it talks about tuning this stuff with chemical doping or by applying an electric field, you now can see something like a phone as you're staring at it or as it's sitting in a position on your desk that allows for the lasers to be potentially activated at your body, right? Or the infrared that's pulsed out of the screens on something like a laptop, as well as all of the antennas in pre-mentioned devices, so tablet, phone, television, laptop, Google Home Nest. You've got the Facebook portal. You've got the I think it's the Amazon Ring, and it goes on and on and on. Those all have radio antennas. And the one that I'm talking about specifically earlier, the 400 gigahertz, that's specifically a Google patent, which likely means it's in their Pixel phone or other Google type devices. So this about that. If they can put a chip that goes from 1 gigahertz or even 1 hertz or 100 megahertz or whatever, up to 400 gigahertz in something like a dinky little phone, it's going in the Google Home device too.
Yeah, but a terahertz is coming. They're at 0.4 terahertz now, but you know how technology advances. They'll be at a terahertz pretty soon. And nano-sized particles, and we're talking about tiny fractions of time when we're talking about the frequencies. You're talking about nanoseconds, femtoseconds. Yeah. So very, very tiny. It's so super tiny, it's almost hard to imagine. And it's very, very fast. Very fast, very tiny, both.
You can generate plasma. You can ionize stuff with femtosecond laser pulses. You can ionize stuff with femtosecond laser pulses. You could do it in the atmosphere, you could do it in the body. So what does that mean? What that means is that you could potentially ionize DNA as it's folding into a protein and affect the hydrogen bonds as they stick together to fold into whatever protein conformation it's going to make, because the hydrogen is very, very, very susceptible to ionization. So if you can rapidly pulse something like infrared light or rapidly pulse something like lower energy electromagnetics in the right way, you can potentially start manipulating protein folding conformations as things are being built from DNA into protein. And I have done extensive discussions about this in the past.
Hydrogens are really important because they're the smallest atom that there is, and they are susceptible and usable for applying charge to things, or subtracting charge. And when you can do that, of course, you can alter what the whole molecule does, just by being able to move hydrogens.
So it says here, and we'll move on, we discussed several strategies to enhance plasmonic effects in topologically distinct closed surface landscapes, graphene nanotubes, cylindrical nanocavities, and toroidal nanostructures, a novel phenomenon of the strongly asymmetric SPP propagation on chiral metastructures, la, 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 la. And it goes in, you could read this whole thing. I may later, but I mean, you build it out and then you tweak it and you can make all of these things. And these ultimately become, I don't even really want to call them metamaterials, but at the nano scale, I really do think they're metamaterials.
This one is a link that I don't have in my 1,000 tabs that are open right now. So you got to get this one to me so I can put it in the show notes.
Okay. Yeah, I can do that. I'll send you some of the highlights because there's, I don't know.
Ooh, that's sexy. Look at that. Candy canes and candy cane donut. Yeah. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah, man.
Oh, man.
Mm-hmm. So this next one, chiral detection using reusable fluorescent amylose functionalized graphene. So what this is kind of getting at, and again, they talk about DNA and peptides being probes. So what they've been able to do for a long time is use bioluminescence.
Can you make
bioluminescence is
Can you enlarge that a little bit?
Yeah. Bioluminescence is this idea
Perfect.
of when something is excited, it emits light. Bioluminescence, jellyfish are bioluminescent. There's algae that's bioluminescent, right?
Fireflies, yep, all that.
Yeah. So if you can extract the genetic code that allows them to bioluminesce, you can make other things that normally don't bioluminesce, you can make them bioluminesce.
That's right.
And so what they've been able to do is use this very strategically to attach it with DNA.
Imaging tool.
Mm-hmm. It's an imaging tool. So when something's stimulated, it glows. And then if it's stimulated a lot, it glows brighter. And what they're talking about here is using reusable fluorescent functionalized graphene in the same manner, more or less, that the biologic materials have been used in the past. And in this this way, what it does is
So overview, 40,000 foot view. Look at all of the applications, the multifaceted applications of graphene. So when you hear about or you see graphene out there in your environment, you're wondering, what could that be used for entertainment purposes only?
Yeah, well, if you have the right keys, then, a Chester may in fact be your entertainment remotely,
right? Doing
whatever the Chester's doing.
Yep.
So it says here that these the detection sensitivity, right, over 100 times higher than that of recently reported electrochemical sensors or calorimetric sensors.
Very nice.
In comparison with commonly used DNA or peptides as a probe, these natural amylose is more attractive because it's low cost, readily available, simple to manipulate, and it's renewable. Now, what would be necessary to be mandated, let's say, throughout an entire population to make sure that you have something that's low cost, readily available, simple to manipulate, and renewable to be inserted into biologicals? What would be needed for something like that?
Can I add a technical? Amylose? You know what amylose is? Amylose is starch. Starch. It's in macaroni, bread, mac and cheese.
That's comforting.
And anyway, go on.
It's comforting.
Rice.
A digital passport. A digital passport of some site would require this, right? Or maybe this will become the digital passport. Therefore, it will know
That's more
so
like
the digital passport will fade away if you're not, if you're not current with your,
your updates,
yeah,
your molecular updates.
You got to get your software upgrades. Otherwise they go away and then you jump off the network. And then maybe as the, this is how I see this going, folks.
Software you see the updates, potential for the
biologic software updates, right? As you update your biologic software, you become dependent upon the internet to govern how healthy or sick you are. Therefore, if you don't continue to receive biological software updates, the network no longer is able to talk to you effectively enough and you die. Because we're talking about cyborging organ systems, which means that the natural electrochemical functionality is hybridized with artificial electrochemical functionality through various transduction mechanisms, i.e. nanotech, that convert one form of energy into another. And once the body is acclimated to functioning that way, if you remove the synthetic electrochemical stimuli, the body will not likely survive, will not likely do very well. For your entertainment only.
We're entering a time at which point you're going to want to have your genetic upgrades and your molecular upgrades in order to stay current, just like with your computer, just like with Windows 10, okay? Whether you want those updates or not, they got to be done. Otherwise, it just stops working and says, nope, I won't work until you update me.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So
crazy, man.
Let's keep going. Chiral nanoassemblies enabled strategy for simultaneously profiling surface glycoproteins, microRNA in living cells. So this goes to the gold. Graphene nanoparticle assemblies are driven by a split DNA strand, which is designed with two regions at both ends that are complementary with the DNA sequence anchored to the surface of the graphene oxide and the gold nanoparticles. Now, all that said, what that means is they've taken DNA and they've attached it to the graphene oxide and the gold nanoparticles, and they have open ends on them. So they're ready. They're ready for sensing.
Yep.
Ready for time.
Active ends for the next building block.
That's right.
Right.
It says here, in the presence of microRNA and epithelial cell adhesion molecules, the hybridization of the microRNA with the molecular probe leads to the separation of the 6-fluorescent modified gold nanoparticles. It separates the gold nanoparticle from the graphene oxide, resulting in a decrease in some signal, a Raman signal, whatever. All this means is that they're able to measure this stuff, and they're able to understand the speed and the rates of change. To what degree or specificity, and whether or not they can do it at distance, in and out of a lab, who knows? But the fact that this is publicly available on the internet tells me likely they can do it from a satellite. I'm just saying. Likely.
This is possible.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, it's way possible. Especially when you start looking at I'll explain to you right now how it's going to work, dude. So rural broadband, 5G, satellite, Starlink, just one of many, not picking on anybody, right?
Right. Now get proximal. You've
got electromagnetic systems. You've got electromagnetic systems that are going to beam down from space, and you're going to have many different beams overlapping the same area, and they create unique electromagnetic signatures. Now, in order to get phone service directly to your handset using a phone, time is an issue, frequency is an issue, and polarization is an issue, as well as amplitude. And the simple way around it is to say, okay, from the cell towers and the cell phones in the car, we're going to project more out horizontally. And so the antennas are programmed to understand that if we're receiving a signal that generally is coming in horizontally, or it's tagged as a horizontal transmission from a cell tower, it'll respond accordingly. If it's tagged or it comes in at a particular angle from space, right, low Earth orbit, then it has another marker on it, and the phone understands that. Going back to those multiple beams up in space that come down and put different unique patterns, right? The internet from space, as we know it, rural broadband, they will be able to talk to the phone, have multiple energy fields coalescing around the phone. Keep in mind, this is from space. So how big do you think that energy field is going to be? It's not going to be as small as the phone. It's not going to be as small as you. It might be as small as your house, maybe. So if you live in an apartment, and you're in a rural area and you got crappy service, when you're getting service from space, that electromagnetic field affects everybody in your immediate vicinity. That being said, it sends information to your phone. Your phone talks back. When your phone talks back, it emits an electromagnetic signal. Because you have all of the different beams from space beaming down on a single area, it's going to be able to understand the signal that's burped out, because it's going to change the electromagnetic characteristics of all those beams that are converged right around your phone. So when your phone talks back, it changes the field characteristics, which the satellite can understand, and that's how it talks back. So it's going to be a complex, compressed, multiplex signal coming from space that's going to beam down and transmit to your phone. And then the phone is going to transmit out, and it's going to change the beams that are coming down from space, which the satellite will understand the change. And that will be the data that goes back to the satellite. And that's going to be your high-speed data link without sending something up to space requiring large amounts of power. So to be able to run your cell phone in a 5G SatLink enabled environment that you bought from Apple, for example, in order for it to have its awesome 10 or 12-hour battery life, but you're getting your feed from space.
It has to conserve power.
It has to transmit as it would normally within a 12-mile proximity or a Wi-Fi proximity, right? So it
ideally
doesn't have to boost
Wi-Fi.
The signal.
Yes.
Right. So in order to do that, you have to create an electromagnetic environment that you're using as a sensor field, so that when your phone transmits out, it changes the characteristic of that sensor field in a known, repeatable way, sending ones and zeros in a compressed fashion that the satellite understands. But anyway, chiral nanoassemblies for profiling surface glycoproteins and microRNA in living cells. They could. So this stuff.
This is important. This is really important stuff.
This is how they're going to do it to your body. This is how they're going to do it to your body from space, also, and your brain and your nervous system. And anyway, they are putting. This is what's happening. The 5G, 6G satellite mesh that is going up is literally creating an artificial membrane around Earth.
40,000-foot view is, remember we started off the show and we were talking about how we've got those five senses, and then we have the other aspects of our consciousness, which in my opinion reside in the far greater capacities of transmit and receive that DNA has, and that's in every single cell of our bodies. The idea of this is to disconnect us from the connection to our own DNA and connect our five terrestrial senses by way of these artificial linkages to a big AI. In other words, an Earth-based, a terrestrial system, so that we become extensions of the AI at the conscious level, rather than being extended expressions of our own internal DNA, which to my thinking, I can't prove it, has all sorts of quantum connections which broach into the spiritual and the paranormal and all that stuff. So that's the goal of this, is to make it all very, very earthly and under control of a gigantic bank of computers.
That's a better way to, the last part was what I was hoping you were going to get at. What this is a mechanization. They are mechanizing, they're mechanizing how you perceive any sense, any change, any perturbation to your existence while you are proverbially trapped here in your meat suit. And I say trapped only for the sake of this example, because this is not a happy, pleasant kind of a thing to think about. Oh, they're doing things to my body that ultimately, potentially, maybe impact my consciousness and my ability to worship, or my ability to connect with a higher power, or my ability to understand and feel and interact with Mother Nature or Gaia, or whatever the hell it is you think that you're praying to or being with. It doesn't matter. The point is that your ability to do so is being infringed, and it's being done so in such a way now that it might be hereditary, meaning whatever decisions we make now will affect the rest of the species forever. So, welcome. Do we want to move on, or do you want to end the show? Because I got all day, Bo. I
don't know. I mean,
more documents and whatever.
We could go on just a little bit more. Just to not at risk of repeating ourselves, but the idea of severing the connection between our higher consciousness and our five senses. This five sense. Think of your meat suit, your body, as your computer monitor. It's your interface device to the world. When all of we've got really great virtualization now. We've got great technology so that, you see something on whatever type of an electronic unit you're using, it looks so real. Imagine that that's being brought on board into your visual cortex and into your auditory cortex. And now that becomes more and more so real that you can't tell that it's not out there in the physical world because it's in your head. Well, now what that's done in a very subtle way is that has displaced the connection that you would have when you, let's say, just a natural human with no technology at all. You're using your five senses and they're communicating to your higher self, your higher consciousness, and that's where your creativity, your imagination, your heart and soul, all that stuff lives, in my opinion. Now, if you disconnect that and you substitute this in a very, very elegant and very accurate form of virtualization, we now become body computers that are connected to a complete earthly control system. And at that point, I think we'd be hard pressed to be able to get back to that higher spiritual creative self again.
It depends.
I know I repeated myself a little bit, but that's huge to me.
So to not worry people too much, because that's kind of freaky. If you believe all that, it's freaky, and I'm freaked out. So I believe that we are dealing with paranormal, to put it mildly. If you extend your idea and say we have a terrestrial-based master control system that's going to insert itself into the intent.
That's the goal.
The intent of the human experience.
That is the goal. It is to insert itself and to sever the connection between the. Go on. You got it. I know you got it.
I slipped in my chair, man. That wasn't me banging.
Oh, geez. I thought
shifting around in my chair. No.
Okay.
It's what you're going to get is something like a ring of quantum computers that offer access through software to the hearts and minds of man. And I say man, but it's woman and man, right? Humans. And when you think of AI being any interface, the software ultimately becomes modular, so that you can do things like introduce AI for lust, or introduce AI for stealing, or introduce AI for not honoring thy father and thy mother, and have AIs that are built to specifically program, specifically repeat whatever's necessary to individuals to violate those things.
Or to control. Yep.
So what I'm getting at is basic AI. Advanced AI, where I think we are and what I think we're currently engaged in, is something like, let's particle smash something at CERN. And when we do that, we know we rip away and shred what we understand as the fabric of space-time, and we get information from that. Large amounts of information come back from particle smashing. What happens in an instant can be broken down and extended out over time. It could be minutes, days, weeks, months. It doesn't matter. Think of it like old alchemy, where you throw rocks in the dirt, and based on how the rocks fell, you make that's the prediction for whatever it is, right? It's I forgot the name of it, but it's a thing, right? It's a basic form of occultism. And it's that in general, but it's done with modern physics and modern science through something like particle smashing. Now, if you were to take a quantum computer, which is nothing more than an advanced probabilistic computation mechanism, different than a supercomputer, although they do work in tandem, and you were to hook it up with something like a particle smasher that opens up the fabric of space-time, and you know that you're getting proverbial interdimensional information back, whether you think it's from consciousness or not. but you're actively looking for that connection. And then you tie it into a quantum computer ring and potentially supercomputer rings that have AIs on it that interface with neural code. If you believe in angels and demons, what I'm talking about is a mechanized version of a beast system that allows for command and control of which demons go into which people. And you hear this thing about, oh, it's a caste-based system. It's a caste-based system. The United States is almost permanently a caste-based system. That we're one of the few countries that aren't. Most other countries are. Where you're born, what family you're born into has everything to do with the outcome of your life, period. And that's where you get monarchies and aristocracies and oligarchies and fascism and all that crap. They're weird social mechanisms to preserve power. And so if you take those ideologies and that intent and you apply it to things like software, AI, and quantum computers and particle smashing, you might get systems that open up interdimensional gateways. Now, the question is, are they all bad? And I say, my belief is no, they're not all bad. The question is, what is human doing? We're putting up a membrane around the earth that's going to regulate what energy proverbially goes in and what energy proverbially goes out.
Yes.
And if you're able to lock the earth down and put it in a proverbial jail, a prison planet, if you will, and then you hook up advanced AI to everybody's nervous system and start particle smashing and opening up proverbial portals, who freaking knows? And that's what makes humans so damn special, is because we have evolved into these highly advanced meat suits that are very coordinated, very smart, and able to master our environment. We can make stuff that make our lives easier. We can also make stuff that kill ourselves. The question is, what are we really going to do with this technology? And everything we've shown tonight really are just a miniaturization of what's already been done with something like a cell phone. What we're attempting to illustrate over a number of weeks, months, if not years, is that whatever you think is possible with a cell phone and whatever they tell you is going to be possible with a cell phone is going directly in your body. And you won't need a cell phone anymore. You will be the cell phone that is also the avatar that is remotely driven by man or other.
Boy.
So the choice is yours.
In one sense, think of the convenience. In another sense, think of the potential danger. But at the end of the day, there is good news. Why? Because I believe that there is an upward mobility that many in the human race possess, which is their spiritual side, their higher self, their higher consciousness. And whatever happens to that meat suit on Earth is something that is limited to the earthly realm. It is limited to that. So all of us are, at various points in age in our lives, our meat suits will eventually, they'll stop functioning. They'll break down, and they call that fatality. But to my view, and it's a spiritual view, and I don't